We now leave Calliope and return 5 million years later. After doing a little exploring, we discovered that the Boks are still thriving, but one branch of them has evolved into a new species that we'll call Hawks. I won't try to theorize about what pressure prompted this evolutionary development. It should be enough for us that it has occurred. Hawks, in most ways, seem closer to Boks than Boks did to Auks, which you'll remember lived in trees, foraged as individuals, and scattered when attacked. Hawks are like Boks in that they live on the ground, forage in teams, and fight shoulder to shoulder when attacked. Hawks have simply taken these tendencies a giant step forward. These are cultural beings. This means that the parents of every generation transmit to their children what they learn from their own parents, together with anything new they learn during their lifetime. What they transmit is an accumulation of material from various periods in their past. For example, every child learns that the branch of a certain tree can be stripped of leaves and used as a sort of fishing pole to gather giant ants from a nest. This technique dates back 3 or 4 million years. Every child learns how to cure the hide of an animal so that it can be used for strapping or clothing. This technique is 2 or 3 million years old. Every child learns how to fabricate twine from the bark of a tree, how to start a fire, how to turn a stone into a cutting tool, how to make a spear and a spear thrower. These techniques are all 1 million years old. Thousands of arts and techniques, various ages, are transmitted from one generation to the next. Although the Hawks live in groups like their predecessors, the Boks, it wouldn't be correct to call them troops, because troops are basically the same from one to another. The Hawks live in tribes. The J's, the K's, the L's, the M's, the N's, and so on. Each very different from all the others. Each tribe has its own distinctive cultural collection that it passes on from one generation to the next, along with the various techniques I mentioned a moment ago, which are the common heritage of all Auks. The tribal heritage includes songs, stories, myths, and customs that may be tens of thousands of years old, or even hundreds of thousands of years old. When we come upon them in the present moment, these are not literate people. And even if they were, their records wouldn't go back tens of thousands of years. If you ask them how old things are, they'd only be able to say that no one knows. These aren't things that, as far as they're concerned, go back to the dawn of time. As far as the J's know, they've literally been around forever. The same is true of the K's, the L's, the M's, and all the rest. There are certain differences between tribe and tribe that seem rather arbitrary. One tribe likes basket weave pots, and another likes corded pots. One tribe likes weaving that are primarily black and white, another likes more colorful weavings. But there are other differences that seem much more crucial. In one tribe, lineage is reckoned through the mother. In another, it is reckoned through the father. In one tribe, elders have a special voice in tribal affairs. In another tribe, all adults have an equal voice. One tribe operates under hereditary rule. Another has a chief who rules until he's bested in single combat. Among the M's, your key relatives are your mother and your uncles on your mother's side, and your father is of no special importance. Among the L's, men and women never cohabit as husbands and wives. Men live together in one longhouse and women live together in another. One tribe practices polyandry, many husbands. Another, polygamy, many wives, and so on and so on. Even more important than all these things are tribal laws, which have only one thing in common. They're not lists of things that are prohibited, but rather procedures for handling problems that inevitably arise in communal life. What do you do when someone is constantly disrupting the peace with his or her bad temper? What do you do when a spouse has been unfaithful? What do you do when someone has injured or killed another tribal member? Unlike the laws you know, Julie, these laws were never formulated by any committee. Rather, they grew up among the tribal members, the way strategies for competition grew up by a steady winnowing out of what didn't work, of what didn't accomplish what people wanted. Over tens of thousands of years, in a very real sense, the elves are the laws of the elves. Or even better, the laws of each tribe represent the will of the tribe. Their laws make utter sense to them in the context of their entire culture. The laws of the elves wouldn't make sense to the Ems, but what difference does that make? The Ems have their own laws, which make utter sense to them. Though, they're clearly very different from those of the elves or anyone else. It will be hard for you to imagine such a thing, but the laws of each tribe are completely sufficient for them, because they've been formulated over the entire lifetime of the tribe. Thousands of years. It's almost inconceivable that some situation could arise that has never been faced before. Nothing is more important for each generation than to receive the law in its entirety. By becoming Ens, or Ems, the youth of each generation are imbued with the will of the tribe. The tribal laws represent what it means to be an L or a K. These are not your laws, Julie, which are largely useless, widely ignored and despised, and forever subject to change. These are laws that do what laws are supposed to do, year after year, generation after generation, age after age. Well, I said, that sounds great, I guess, but it also sounds sort of stagnant, to be honest. Ishmael nodded. Of course, I want you to be honest, Julie. Always. Remember, however, that in every case these laws represent the will of the tribe, not the will of some outsider. No one forces them to embrace these laws. No court will send them to jail if they scrap their heritage. They're perfectly free to abandon it at any time, if they want. Okay. Only one thing remains to be done before we quit for the day, and that is to examine competition among the Cocks. The patterns that have evolved among them are very similar to those that prevail among the Boths. Within the tribe, what works best for every individual is to support and defend the tribe. Even though each tribal member needs the same resources, his or her best way to get them is to cooperate with other tribal members. As with the Box, whose competition is troop against troop, competition among the Cocks is tribe against tribe. In this area, we notice that a new strategy is in play, in addition to the ones we're familiar with. This might be described as a strategy of erratic retaliation. Give as good as you get, but don't be too predictable. In practice, give as good as you get means that if the M's aren't bothering you, don't bother them. But if the M's do bother you, then be sure to return the favor. Don't be too predictable means that even if the M's aren't bothering you, it will be no bad thing if you make a hostile move against them from time to time. They will, of course, retaliate, giving as good as they get, but this is just the price to be paid for letting them know that you're there and haven't gotten soft. Then, once the score is even between you, you can get together for a big reconciliation party to celebrate your undying friendship and do some matchmaking because, of course, it doesn't do to breed endlessly within a single tribe. Although the strategy of the erratic retaliator may sound rather combative, it's actually a peacekeeping strategy. Think of two people who are quarreling over whether to go to a movie or to a play. Instead of settling the argument with blows, they flip a coin, agreeing beforehand that they'll go to the movie if it's heads and the play if it's tails. The same purpose is served by agreeing to attack if you're a resident and to flee if you're an intruder. Combat is avoided if both parties follow the same strategy. Even so, if you spend a year observing the J's, the K's, the L's, the M's, the N's, the O's, and so on, what you see is that they seem to be in a state of more or less constant but very low-level warfare with each other. I don't mean daily or even monthly warfare, though there will be border skirmishes as frequently as that. I mean that every tribe exists in a state of perpetual readiness, and once or twice a year every tribe will initiate a raid against one or more of its neighbors. To a person of your culture, this will seem puzzling. A person of your culture will want to know when the Cox are at least going to settle their differences and learn to live in peace. And the answer is that the Cox will settle their differences and learn to live in peace as soon as mountain sheep settle their differences and learn to live in peace, and as soon as sticklebacks settle their differences and learn to live in peace, and as soon as elephant seals settle their differences and learn to live in peace. In other words, the competitive strategies practiced among the Cox mustn't be viewed as disorders, as character defects, as problems to be solved, any more than the competitive strategies of white-footed mice, wolves, or elks are these things. Far from being defects to be eliminated, they are what is left over when all other strategies are eliminated. In short, they are evolutionarily stable. They work for the Cox. They've been tested for millions of years, and every other strategy tested against them has been eliminated as a failure. Whew, I said. That sounds like a climax. It is, Ishmael said. One last point, as we'll call it a day. Why do the Ends just retaliate to attacks from their neighbors and occasionally initiate attacks of their own? Why don't they just go ahead and annihilate their neighbors? Why would they do that? Ishmael shook his head. That's not the right question, Julie. It doesn't matter why they would do it. The question is, why wouldn't it work? Or maybe it would work. Maybe it would work. Maybe it would work better than the other strategy. This time, instead of just raiding the M's, the J's go in there and wipe them out. That changes the game entirely, I said. Go on. That would be like agreeing to flip a coin and then refusing to abide by the call. Why is that, Julie? Because M's can't retaliate if you wipe them out. The game is, I'll retaliate if you attack me, and I know you'll retaliate if I attack you. But if I wipe you out, then you can't retaliate. The game's off. That's right. But then what, Julie? Let's suppose the J's have annihilated the M's. What are the K's, the L's, the N's, the O's going to think about this? The light dawned at last. I see where you're going now, I told him. They're going to say, if the Jays are going to start annihilating opponents, then we've got to adopt a new strategy toward them. We can't afford to treat them as though they're still playing erratic retaliator, because they're not. We have to treat them as though they're playing annihilator. Otherwise, they may just annihilate us. And how do they have to treat them if they're playing annihilator? I'd say it would depend. If the Jays go back to playing erratic behavior, then they could probably just let it be. But if the Jays continue to play annihilator, then the survivors are going to have to join forces against the Jays and annihilate them. Ishmael nodded. This is what the Native Americans did when the European settlers finally made it completely clear that they were never going to play anything but annihilator with them. The Native Americans tried to put aside old intertribal grudges and join forces against the settlers, but they waited too long.